What's going on, everybody? I'm Matt Harmon. Welcome to the Yahoo Fantasy Forecast, and it is a hell of a day to talk ball. And join me to do just that is Justin Boone. Boone, what's going on, buddy?
What's happening, dude? I mean, this seems to be the time of the year when I think some fantasy managers, and let's be real, like some fantasy analysts as well, start to kind of get a little too comfortable. We've been at this now for 14 weeks. There might be even people out there that are like, oh man, I got to set my fantasy lineup again. I got to do waivers again. And yet, this is the start of the fantasy playoffs in most leagues. So we got to dial up the energy. We got to get everybody going. And we're making a big change on the show today, right? Which you said we were going to do last week. We are making a shift from the panic meter to the trust meter for the playoffs, which I'm excited because this is my first go around with the trust meter. So you're going to have to walk me through this one.
It's essentially the same thing, just different stakes, because as you mentioned, the time for panicking, the time for coping, that's over. We're living week by week, baby. These are elimination games every single week. You lose, you're out. And it's no more time to panic. It's time to make some decisions. It's time to help people. And yeah, you're right. After Thanksgiving, I will admit I get a little bit of senioritis, because that one it's a delicate process, this fantasy football thing. Every day is its own individual thing. And then when you throw one little grain of sand into the machine, everything kind of falls apart. That one Thanksgiving week, it really disrupts the rhythm. And then you got to get back into it. But you know what? I've had some fun playoff matchups in my own leagues. I had a huge shout out to me, underdog win in one of my dynasty leagues where I thought I was completely toast, but a few breaks went my way. So I'm fired up, man. I'm fired up for my playoff teams. I'm fired up for these next few slate of games here. And I'm fired up for today's show because, as Boone mentioned, it is the debut of the fantasy trust meter. Structure of the show, we're going to get into the trust meter in the first two segments. Third segment, Boone is actually going to debut his backup running back rankings. That's going to be critical for you folks who are stashing running backs on the waiver wire heading into your playoff matchups. And then speaking of the waiver wire, we're going to finish it up as we always do with a look at the top picks off the wire this week. So with that, we say goodbye to the panic meter and we say hello to the fantasy trust meter.
Playoffs? Don't talk about playoffs. I just hope we can win a game.
All right, so the fantasy playoff trust meter, this is all about determining if guys we've been relying on all season or maybe have been a little bit up and down and you're kind of in a, hey, I got to start this guy anyway sort of situation. We're deciding if they are reliable in the fantasy postseason. And most importantly, we are focused on the upcoming week. So we are looking right at week 15 here for most of these. Just like the panic meter, we have 4 levels in the fantasy trust meter. We have full trust, meaning I know this is going to be okay this week. We have some trust, which is I think this will be okay this week. No trust, which essentially it could go either way. It's not that it's not going to be bad, but we just don't know one way or another. And then the fourth is you're cooked. Okay, just pretty much run away, abort mission, try to figure something else out. So we're gonna go 2 segments here at the top. The first segment, we're going to be looking at AFC teams / offenses in free fall. And we have certainly had some changes in the AFC playoff race, according to a variety of metrics, both ESPN, their FPI, also the Athletics playoff simulator. These teams are in trouble. Colts, Ravens, Chiefs. As we're showing from Seth Walder here, the Colts have a 30% chance to make the postseason, the Ravens a 29% chance, and the Chiefs a 16% chance. So these are the 3 teams we're going to dial in on here. Let's start with the Indianapolis Colts offense. Justin Boone, I mean, it was bad on Sunday, and I actually feel like it's gotten worse since then. Before we give our designation here, where do you what's your feeling on this Colts situation? We learned today that Daniel Jones is indeed out for the season with the torn Achilles.
I mean, I can't believe I'm saying this based on how hot this team was at the start of the year, but they're cooked. It's over. Like, I don't think they're going to make the playoffs. I think this is totally falling apart from a fantasy perspective. And it's not just Daniel Jones being out. It's their backup. Obviously, we know Anthony Richardson, he's been done for the season for a while with that, weird face eye injury that he suffered off the field. Riley Leonard, who comes in now, he's dealing with the knee injury. Shane Steichen saying they hope he can play. I pride myself in knowing like as many players, if not every player on every depth chart across the league. I've had friends quiz me before, like who's the, third string defensive tackle for the Panthers. I want to know all that stuff. I had to go look who the other quarterback was on this roster. It's Brett Rippon, who's on their practice squad, but man, this is getting ugly really, really fast for this offense. And Jonathan Taylor is going to get his touches. I mean, he's still going to be an okay fantasy start, but he's not going to be anywhere near what he has been this season, which is unfortunate because, I mean, I talked about this a few weeks ago that I thought maybe he could be a little less valuable for fantasy down the stretch, but it's like the Matrix meme, right? It's like, not like this, like, not like, I don't want to see it happen like this. Like, I thought it was going to be tough matchups and maybe they had, a little bit of a harder time down the stretch, not just completely falling apart because their quarterback depth chart is essentially just destroyed. And I mean, you're looking at it and this week, who do they have to play? Do they get an easy matchup to maybe get over this? No, not at all. They have to go against the Seahawks. They're 12.5-point underdogs in this game. Like, oh, Seattle, the last 2 weeks, we've seen what they can do to like teams that are struggling. 63 points for, 9 points against in their last 2 games. So it is rough. And we have the graphic up right now of, Joe Flacco and the bat signal that if we could ever get Joe Flacco there, could he save things? Why would the Bengals do that? Like the Bengals are trying to make the playoffs themselves. Yeah. So there'd be absolutely no reason for them to help out another AFC team that's fighting for a playoff spot. So yeah, it's about as bad as it can get. It's going to be hard to play these receivers with the quarterback situation right now. Do you feel any different, Harmon?
Oh, no. I think from a designation standpoint on the meter, you're cooked is absolutely where this Colts offense is at this point. Man, if anybody, look, sometimes you can be right for the wrong reasons and not the reasons that you want to see. But if anybody took your advice on selling Jonathan Taylor at the height of his value prior to the trade deadline of fantasy football, my God, they owe you 3, 4, 5 Christmas gifts this year. They need to send you a few gift packages along the way. I know you were right for the wrong reasons, whatever.
I'm not victory lapping that. Yeah, I'm definitely not victory lapping
that. I'm not telling you to victory. I am not telling you to victory lap it. I'm just saying if anybody took your advice, that really ended up working out for the wrong reasons, but regardless, it ended up working out. Okay, so let's talk about this team this week. You mentioned it. Riley Leonard, who I think acquitted himself. If I was to give him just a grade, like a phrase grade for how he played on Sunday, I would say, well, it could have been a lot worse. For a 6th-round rookie to get in there and play the way he did, 92 of his 145 passing yards came on throws of 10 or fewer air yards. That's going to come back up later. But it was essentially, let's get the ball out quick. He had one really nice throw to Michael Pittman, a back shoulder, should have been touchdown. That was called back due to the OPI epidemic that is coursing through the NFL right now. And honestly, I'm not actually going to really complain about it that much because defenses have to deal with so much crap. These defensive players don't have a lot going their way. If they want to call the OPIs, it's not going to be good for us. It's certainly not going to be good for a big receiver, but regardless, maybe it's something that the defensive players can have back. So that's a piece of missing context from his stat line that I thought that was a really nice throw. But you mentioned it, Riley Leonard dealing with a knee injury. He's uncertain for Sunday. Anthony Richardson, we don't know if he's going to come back this season. He could, but we don't know if he is. I would say the odds, the reporting on that has not been very good. You mentioned Brett Rippon is on the practice squad. Tyler Warren has taken 3 snaps as a quarterback this year. He is technically their nominal emergency quarterback, and I'm writing a piece about this Colts offense right now, and I wrote in the piece, sure sounds like I'm describing an emergency, right? Like these conditions that I'm lying out here certainly sound like something close to an emergency. So I would say the one guy who maybe could survive this, and I emphasize the word survive, is Michael Pittman in the passing game. We saw him get 12 targets in this game. A lot of those on the 0 to 10 air yard throws. Seattle plays a ton of too high coverage. Maybe they won't because they'll bring somebody into the box here to defend against Jonathan Taylor in the run game with Riley Leonard theoretically under center. But typically they do play a lot of deeper coverage. That's where Michael Pittman gets those underneath sort of routes. I would say I'm going to have him ranked kind of as like wide receiver 31-ish. So in certain formats, he's still going to be startable, but certainly much lower than I would have had him in essentially any other week this season.
Yeah, I also find, I mean, you said that maybe Pittman's the guy that could survive it. I wonder if Tyler Warren is the guy who could survive it. Not because he's going to play quarterback, but they also scheme him up some stuff, right? Like we could see them maybe do a little bit more of that, a little more gadgety stuff for him, get him some carries, that kind of thing. And we mentioned this last week, but going against Seattle, Seattle's defense is a bad matchup for everybody, except weirdly for fantasy tight ends. That's like the one position that seems to do fairly well against them. And it happened again last week after we said that, right? Kyle Pitts drops 90 on them. Not exactly the same scenario. Kyle Pitts getting a ton of volume, but Tyler Warren could definitely command a lot of volume on top of the fact that, yeah, he could get some other work there. So maybe he's a guy that is, again, like surviving this, not giving you like the top 3, top 4, top 5 numbers, but still giving you potentially tight end 1 fantasy production. But you look at the rest of the way, it's not just Seattle either, right? Like San Francisco's defense is not what it once was, but they're playing for something. They're a playoff team. They're going to be fighting. Jacksonville the week after that. Houston to finish off the year. Houston's making superstar elite quarterbacks look terrible. Imagine what they're going to do to this offense. So, yeah, there's not a lot to look at here and feel good about the rest of the way.
No, it's a good point about Tyler Warren, who leads the team with 7 yards after catch per reception. He's been that guy for this team. I was mostly just thinking about the wide receivers in terms of like Alec Pierce versus Michael Pittman. Pittman, I think, theoretically fits better if Riley Leonard's going to get the football out quick. But yeah, I think we could see some designer touches to Tyler Warren. I'm still going to have him ranked as a tight end 1. I don't know that you're going to just grab somebody off the waiver wire that's profiling better from a target perspective than Tyler Warren. But yeah, listen, it happens sometimes. You lose your starting quarterback, your team is cooked. And I certainly think at this point, these Colts offensive players from a fantasy standpoint are cooked. Okay, let's get to the next one here. This is Patrick Mahomes and Rashee Rice versus the Los Angeles Chargers. These two guys have been really awesome in fantasy for the most part, but not so awesome last week. Patrick Mahomes in the EPA per dropback rankings was sandwiched between Cam Ward and Brady Cook. You don't want to be there if you are the Chiefs starting quarterback. Rashee Rice, I mean, just a disgusting game on Sunday night from Rashee Rice. And I say that as someone that has Rashee Rice in his guillotine league, and as we head into Monday night, I'm counting on the damn Eagles to make a big performance against this Chargers defense, and I don't feel too good about it to not get chopped in my guillotine league because of what Rashee Rice did on Sunday night. So Boone, Chiefs offense, specifically Mahomes and Rice. I'll go first on this one. I think I've got some trust in these guys. Are you more or less optimistic than that?
No, I think I'm at the same spot. Like, if you look at the matchup with the Chargers, it's not a great matchup, right? Like last year in the 2 games, they held them under 15 fantasy points both times, so not great. This year, when they played early in the season, he saved his fantasy day with the rushing production, which he's done many times this year, right? It was 57 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown in this game. But I'm just not nearly as worried about these guys this week because they're not facing the Texans. And yes, the offensive line is still mangled. There's still some issues to figure out there. And the Chargers, like I said, are a good defense, but I think there's a difference between what the Texans are doing right now to teams and what the Chargers defense could potentially do to teams. So I think these guys are going to be fine. We might not see ceiling games from them, but not any reason to pull them out of your lineup or really be that scared in this one because, again, just because we saw that happen against the Texans are doing that to basically everyone. I don't think we're going to see the Chargers have the same kind of impact on this offense. I still think they'll be able to put up some points.
And kind of furthering here, just this is a very different matchup, not just from the way, like how good these two defenses are, which the Chargers are a good defense, but schematically it should be a much better matchup for this Chiefs passing game. The Chargers since week 8, they're 6th in terms, and obviously we don't count Monday night because we're taping this before Monday Night Football. We're live here on YouTube. If you're not listening to us live, remember we're live 5 p.m. Eastern, basically every day for the rest of my life on our YouTube channel. The Chargers from week 8 until week 13, they're 6th in terms of zone coverage rate in the NFL. Now, they're very good at that. According to Fantasy Points data, they give up the lowest points per dropback in zone coverage in that span. So it's definitely what they do, and they do it well. But it's sort of a strength-on-strength matchup there because the Chiefs have been excellent against zone coverage, and we certainly saw the Texans kind of man up on these wide receivers, Rashee Rice included. He had some drops and some bad plays in this game as well. But I would be surprised if we get another outright bust game from Rice 2 games in a row. All of his flaws included, he's still an excellent fantasy producer. There's no question about that.
Yeah, and this level of player, when you're talking about Rice or even Mahomes, it has to be like an exceptional matchup that you're going to consider sitting these guys. You have to have either incredible other options to turn to, or it has to be a defense that completely scares you. And I don't want to go like full macho man here, but that Texans defense right now, they are the cream of the crop at the moment when it comes to defensive play. You should be scared for all your fantasy assets when they're going against them. I just don't feel like that about the Chargers. But again, let's see what happens tonight in the Monday night game. Maybe the Chargers will come out and show us something and just dominate the Eagles, and then we'll have to rethink this whole segment.
I need them to allow 20 points apiece to Jalen Hurts and Saquon Barkley, actually. So let's hope that that's what happens on Monday night. It's definitely not going to happen, regardless of any jinxes or anything. So they get the Chargers in Week 15, do the Chiefs, and then Week 16 they get the Titans. I don't think we'll be talking about them as a panic option or a trust option going into Week 16. I think we'll feel pretty good about that. And then we'll reassess in Week 17 when they get the Broncos, which is another tough matchup. And they certainly play much more man coverage than the Chargers secondary does. Last one that we're going to talk about here in this first segment, the AFC offense is in free fall. We've got he's back, baby. We put him in the coping corner, but he's back here for the trust meter. Lamar Jackson at Cincinnati to face the Bengals here in Week 15. We got a good fantasy performance from Lamar Jackson last week. That was good. Wasn't exactly a good NFL performance overall by the Ravens offense as they lost to Pittsburgh Steelers with Aaron Rodgers in a turn back the clock type of moment.
Yeah, I do feel, though, that the point you made last week certainly stands here, and that's that if a few things went different in that Bengals game in Week 13 the week before, he would have had another touchdown or two. The fantasy numbers would have been a little better. We wouldn't have had like the same concern about him going into this game. And then, like you said, a decent fantasy game, still a ton of struggles when it comes to this offense. I think everything we said last week about them still stands in terms of the way Lamar's playing at the moment, him not being 100%, Derrick Henry still being good, but not necessarily being like that superhuman version of Derrick Henry that could carry this offense all by himself anymore. All these things still stand here. But yeah, I think a big thing is going back to that Bengals game and realizing that even though the final stat line wasn't great, he could have had a good game. And I think that's what we'll probably see here. He'll come out, have another decent fantasy performance, but it's the ceiling that's not there anymore. So I have some trust. I can't go all the way back in on this because it wasn't a sparkling performance last week. And it was only 2 weeks ago when he had a bad fantasy game against the same defense. But yeah, I think it's the ceiling that probably just isn't there down the stretch. We're not going to see the 30+ point games from him. You know, we're not going to see him put on that cape and not only lead the Ravens, but lead fantasy managers to wins and to fantasy championships. That's just not what Lamar is. So hopefully the rest of your team along the way is very strong and you're able to overcome it and just have Lamar out there putting up mid-range QB1 numbers, because I don't think we're going to see the top 2, top 3 kind of stats from him over the last few games here, including this week, even though the matchup is still very good.
I wouldn't completely rule it out. I think it's in the range of outcomes that he has that type of performance. It's just not what I'm going to bank on necessarily. Like, I'm going to rank him as a top 5 quarterback, not a top 2 quarterback going into this week. It's really funny that, oh my God, get this off the screen about passer rating over the last 3 weeks. Lamar Jackson, Shedeur Sanders, please, let's be serious here for 5 minutes. Lamar Jackson, though, I think one thing that is encouraging is, you know, your Bills just carved up the Bengals, of course, with their tight ends last week in the snow. What a beautiful game, by the way. Love to see that. Like football, snow, Josh Allen doing crazy stuff in the snow. That's what the sport is all about. So the Bengals gave a bunch of production to the tight ends. Isaiah Likely is really weirdly in the wake of Mark Andrews getting a 3-year contract extension that looks like it's something from 2020. Isaiah Likely's really turned it on. I mean, he should have had a touchdown on that one play against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Football move, I have no idea, but that is a touchdown per my eyeballs. So to me, like, Likely looks like he's turning it on right now. That is in an interesting time when that's the player that the Ravens would theoretically need to have that type of performance against the Bengals defense for Lamar Jackson to have a top 2 scoring day here.
Yeah, 100%. And it wasn't it the week before when he could have also had a touchdown in that game, right? Yeah. So we could have seen 2 more touchdowns from him the last 2 weeks. And that's why, I mean, We'll talk about him when we get to the waiver wire section later. Like, absolutely, you're looking to play Likely in this game. Every single, like, multiple tight ends every week are getting over. I don't know how the Bengals are this bad. It's like historically bad against tight ends. Dawson Knox, Jackson Haas, Dalton Kincaid. Everyone is having a good game against these guys, and it's happened for the vast majority of the season here. So yeah, no reason to think that Likely won't maybe hold on to a touchdown this week against them and come away with a big game. Like I said, we'll talk about him in the waiver wire section, but he's a very solid streamer and wouldn't be surprised to see him in the top 12 this week.
All right, we're going to take our first quick break. When we come back, we're running through some frustrating wide receivers and whether we trust them or not here in week 15. We'll get into those right after this. All right, we're back. We're continuing the fantasy playoff trust meter. And now we're going to look at some frustrating wide receivers. We've got 7 names to get, well, 6 wide receivers and one little throw-in bonus at the end. So how we're going to title this one will be interesting. But yeah, let's start with a man, another feature of the Coping Corner, someone we talked about a lot for the panic meter submissions. That is Justin Jefferson going to Dallas to take on a very generous Cowboys secondary. Like, if you're watching this on YouTube right now, you can just see Boone's face. It's just perfect for, oh my God, how are we still in this position where we're talking about Justin Jefferson for the fantasy freaking trust meter? And look, Boone, I'll start this one. I've got no trust. How can you have any trust? How could you possibly? I'm not going to go so far as to say you're cooked, because at least J.J. McCarthy gave us a positive performance. Truly his first positive EPA per dropback performance of the season in a very strong outing against a very generous Commanders defense. And yet Justin Jefferson still did nothing from a fantasy standpoint. Wide receiver 73 on the week, as we're showing right now. So how can you possibly have any trust in Jefferson, even in a great matchup?
Yeah, I can't stop shaking my head here, because one of the main things that I kept mentioning when we talked about Justin Jefferson, 4 weeks ago, 5 weeks ago, every time it came up in the panic meter was, man, that schedule, though, when we get to week 14 and on, those last 4 weeks, the schedule is incredible, right? The schedule is so good, and yet it's not going to matter, Harmon. I totally agree with you. It's no trust. He faced the Commanders this week, obviously. The Cowboys, the Giants, and the Lions. Those are the 3 that he has remaining. Those are 4 of the 5 easiest defenses. The last 4 matchups, 4 of the 5 easiest defenses to face for fantasy receivers. And yet we're still sitting here and saying, I have no trust. I just have none. I don't know what's going to change. Like you said, J.J. McCarthy had an okay game. Like, I know the stats were good from a fantasy perspective.
Yeah.
I didn't think it was incredible. There were definitely some positives to take from it. He was getting the ball out quick. He seemed a little more like confident or comfortable out there than he had in some other matchups, but also it was a very easy opponent he was facing. Now, he's going to have some, I don't know. I don't even want to get into it because producer Colin will go crazy if we talk about how bad that Cowboys defense still is, but up front, they have gotten better. No doubt up front, they've gotten better. Maybe they'll get a little pressure on him, but you can still throw on this Cowboys defense. So yes, they should have success, but they just had some success through the air. And like you said, Jefferson, it's just not happening for him, right? Like 4 catches for 15 yards over the last 2 weeks. How is this real? How is this actually what's happening to Justin Jefferson? Is he even going to hit 1,000 yards? And I know that's it's a trivial number. Like, we all pick 1,000 yards and then the season gets 1 game longer. We still talk about 1,000 yards. Like it, really matters. It doesn't yet. Right now he's at, I believe, 810 yards. And I'm not confident at all that he's going to be able to get over 1,000. That's just where it's gotten to with Jefferson. And I feel bad. Could he potentially pop up for a game or two? He could, certainly, with these matchups. Could he find the end zone at any time? He's definitely capable of that. He also seems like he's trying to get through it, right? Like, he seems like he's trying to stay positive. He's like, giving props to McCarthy still. Like, he's being that good team guy, that leader. He hasn't gone like the diva receiver route where he's pouting. We've seen so many receivers do that. So that's great to see. Yeah. And yet still he's not getting the targets. And I just don't know what we can look to say, okay, all of a sudden that light's going to turn on and this McCarthy, the JJ to JJ thing that we thought was going to emerge as something this season, that all of a sudden that's going to start to produce. I don't think it is.
Yeah. I don't know what we could call it, but there needs to be like a good soldier award in the NFL, and it needs to go to Justin Jefferson in the 2025 season. I mean, how many other elite tier 1 wideouts would handle this as well as Jefferson has? I mean, like, the worst thing that's happened is he ducked the media after Max Brosmer's start in Seattle, which, like, that's the biggest infraction. Guy who leads the NFL in yards per game since he arrived in pro football. I'm comfortable with that. And then he said after this week's game, well, I'd rather not get the football and win than not get the football and lose. So, I mean, he has handled this as well as you possibly can. He's never thrown McCarthy under the bus, never like glared at him too hard on the field or something like that. Even you can even see during the game sometimes where he takes the low route in a high-low combination when Jefferson's the high route. He like is hyped up for McCarthy when he completes it to the low man. So again, he is handling this as well as possible. Anybody that has him in their fantasy teams is probably not being as graceful in how they are handling this situation this year. That is for sure. JJ McCarthy, 10 of 11 on quick throws and 85 yards and 2 touchdowns. According to Next Gen Stats, they kind of changed up the offense a little bit in that they really prioritized getting it out of his hands quickly, getting it to the tight ends in the flat. They went kind of drive by drive with the 2 running backs. So maybe we do see one more wrinkle here and Jefferson, gets going against the Cowboys. And remember, when we say no trust, it's basically could go either way. Like, we are still talking about Justin Jefferson. If you have to start him this week, and I'll probably still rank him as a wide receiver 2, which is still insane to say because it's Justin Jefferson, but I'll still rank him as a wide receiver 2. And if he's wide open down the field because the Cowboys can't cover anybody, and he waltzes into the end zone, has 90 yards and a touchdown, which would feel like a miracle. You can't be that surprised by it. He is still Justin Jefferson.
Yeah, and this is why we always talk about like range of outcomes and possibilities, probabilities, all that sort of stuff. That's what fantasy really boils down to. And this is just absolute worst case scenario. Like, barring an injury that was going to put him out for the season, this was worst case scenario for Justin Jefferson. This is about as bad as it could get when he is playing all the games and producing this way. I mentioned that schedule. I think the only thing we can hang our hat on is just that McCarthy starts to show little signs like he did last week. You should do well against these defenses. So just keep putting, little win by little win together, start to get more comfortable. And then maybe going into next season after a full off season, you'll be able to feel even that much more comfortable and the team will stick with them, but they're going to bring in competition. And unless we do see something pretty significant from him in these easy matchups, I would think they're going to bring in somebody that could potentially actually beat him for the starting job next year.
Yeah, I was saying all last week, Marcus Mariota, Vikings quarterback 2026. Then Marcus Mariota threw a pick six against these Minnesota Vikings. So I don't know, maybe that will dissuade them from that. But that's the type of competition, like someone that we've actually seen start games and be good and can legitimately push McCarthy. Because hopefully this is the type of end of season where he can just stack some solid moments. Like that's all we're asking. Stack solid moments. Be comfortable in this offense, look functional, and we'll see what happens next year. So I'm going to be open-minded to that down the stretch, but the range of outcomes has been established of what it is for Justin Jefferson, and the low end of that range is quite frightening. Speaking of low end of the range of outcomes and staying in that same game, let's talk about George Pickens versus the Minnesota Vikings. We finally saw the low end of George Pickens' range of outcomes, which includes bad fantasy performances and Richard Sherman talking about him on the post-game broadcast and George Pickens posting on his Instagram story. You know, that felt very same old George Pickens. But Boone, I will say that the aftermath of that included head coach Brian Schottenheimer saying, "Hey, I talked to George, and it was a very accountable moment. It's really not a big deal." The quote from Schottenheimer, we talked about it. In his words, he said, "Hey, Schotty, I didn't play my best game. Unfortunately, none of us played our best game. But I don't worry about George and his love of football and playing this game," which I really like the way Schottenheimer's kind of handled a variety of situations this year. This one certainly included. I'll be honest, buddy, I got full trust on the George Pickens experience here against the Minnesota Vikings. Tough matchup, of course. You don't like what happened last week, but I'm not too concerned about George Pickens going to this matchup. Do you agree with me on full trust for Pickens in Week 15?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we're not going to change our view of Pickens based on one game. Before last week, double-digit fantasy points in every game since week 1. That was the only other time that he didn't get to that mark. And CeeDee Lamb in concussion protocol, he's got a few extra days, though, because they played early last week. So I feel like he's got a good shot to clear here. Even if he doesn't, either way this goes, whether he's out there or not, I think you're going to start Pickens with confidence because we've seen them produce together all season long. So yeah, Pickens, a top 15 wideout. I haven't done my rankings yet for this week. If not, in the top 12 again. Brian Flores' defense can be tricky, but Dak Prescott's a veteran. He's gone against some tough defenses recently, the Eagles, the Chiefs. He's gone over 300 yards. He's thrown multiple touchdowns in those games. Like, I'm not worried about this passing attack getting there. And I don't think Vegas is either, right? Like, the Cowboys are 6-point favorites. The game's got a decent total at 47.5. So I think there's going to be some points in this one. And we know when that happens, Pickens normally gets involved aside from 2 games this year when he hasn't produced. And just because one of them happened recently, right before the fantasy playoffs, that does not mean that we're going to overreact and do anything crazy and take him out of our lineups. You're going to start him with confidence. He is going to be fine.
No, look, and I mean, going back and reviewing that game, a lot of what happened, especially when CeeDee Lamb went out, is they just put a press corner right on top of George Pickens. And when they got in single high looks, they put the safety shaded towards George Pickens' side, which left things wide open for Flournoy to go crazy in that game. Ryan Flournoy legit had an awesome game, and I will admit I have him stashed on a dynasty team. I can publicly finally come out and say that I have him on a dynasty bench, and it is actually annoying because I might lose that game very closely, and Ryan Flournoy's 36 points on my bench. It's just annoying to look at. There was no way I would have started him. It's just annoying to look at, but regardless, I'm at least open. I'm open to the Ryan Flournoy experience. I'm flow curious. We'll put it that way.
Well, I will also admit that this is not the last time that name will come up before the end of the show, Harmon. He may or may not be mentioned in our waiver wire section later. Just have that as a little tease. He might be in the waiver wire section for receivers.
All right, perfect. Another repeat offender and a guy that, look, maybe you were right. Maybe we should have gone Coping Corner last week for Emeka Egbuka. My God, we're talking about it again. Emeka Egbuka, Atlanta Falcons, Thursday night football. Boone. How can we possibly have any trust? I can't say you're cooked, right? But I have to say no trust here on the panic meter for Egbuka.
Yeah, I feel like we should be wearing black. Like every time we talk about him, I feel like it's just a bit of a funeral for us. Yeah, I guess you are. Yeah, I didn't get the memo.
I got the black hoodie, black joggers. I've got the black bracelet, the black watch. The fake ring.
Okay, you were ready. You were ready.
I'm ready.
Yeah, I was not. because like this was our dude before the season. It might have been the very first show we did together where I talked about him and said, like, I thought that was the best value, right? I thought that was the best value in fantasy drafts in the summer. And he comes out, he looks fantastic. I think we both still have faith that he's going to have a great career in the NFL. And yet something has happened to him here where we just keep adding to this stat. I hate bringing it up every week, but one game with more than 10 fantasy points in his last 8 outings now. And it's been even worse than that, right? Like held under 45 yards in 4 straight games. Like, I don't know. And I said this last week, I don't know what is going to change in the next few weeks where all of a sudden we're going to get the kind of production that we were getting from him earlier in the season. And another guy that has the talent that could pop up for a big performance at any given moment. But do you feel good about him in your lineup after what he's done, which is probably sewer a lot of teams. There's probably a lot of teams that aren't making the fantasy playoffs because they had him in their lineup and because they kept trusting him. I'll go back to that one charity league that I mentioned multiple times where I think he is probably a big reason why I didn't actually make the playoffs in that league. I came up a game or two short, on top of the fact that I had the most points scored against me, but we don't need to talk about that. Regardless, I just don't know what's going to change that's all of a sudden going to make him into anything close to the player we saw in the first month of the season. So yeah, it's too bad, but it is no trust right now. And if you want to take him out of your lineup, unlike Jefferson, I actually think you could potentially take Egbuka out of your lineup at this point for someone else because he's down in the low end wide receiver 2, maybe getting into the high end wide receiver 3 range this week.
Yeah, that sounds about where I'm going to have him. I'm actually juggling ranking him along with one of the other guys we're going to talk about here in a moment. Like, who do I actually trust more? But yeah, look, I mean, here's the deal with the Egbuka stuff. I'm one of those people that that actually in my guillotine league where I'm complaining about Rashee Rice. If I had started anybody else essentially other than Egbuka, I'd be fine. If I'd started Michael Pittman, Jalen Warren, like any of these guys, I would have been fine. Not that I was really considering starting those players, but could have, right? Certainly could have done it. But it is what it is. I might get chopped because of the Egbuka thing, which would be fitting because I was too stubborn to admit that he probably should have been in the coping corner on last week's show. Here's the deal. So since week 6, according to Fantasy Points data, he has the lowest catchable target rate in the NFL. 51.4% of his targets have been catchable. That is the second place player is your boy Adonai Mitchell at 58.8%. Like there's a healthy gap. They're the only 2 guys under 60%. There is a healthy gap between Emeka Egbuka and everybody else. And in that same span, again, this is just their charting, but they've got him at a 40% contested catch rate. He's caught 2 of 5 contested targets, and he has 6 drops. Like that's how you get that type of disgusting catch rate he has. Is it's everything. Baker has been off. He's in the role that it's these it's a high degree of difficulty targets. With Mike Evans being out, and maybe Mike Evans plays in this game on Thursday. Maybe he doesn't. We'll know more throughout the course of the week. And it's just like when he has that opportunities. It's been drops, like we saw the one on the out and up where it's definitely a pass that Baker can absolutely throw better. And it is a pass that Egbuka can absolutely catch. So at any moment, one of the two, if not both of the two, can get right. And it could happen on Thursday night. It could happen. It's not a 0% chance. Like he's talented. He's out there. He's not going to get benched. He is a good football player. I don't want to hear any, nonsense about him not being good. He's good. He's just kind of got the yips right now with the drops, and his quarterback is not playing up to his full potential. So maybe that changes against the Falcons defense that's kind of floundering, but we've been saying that for months and months and months. So that's just the state of the state with Emeka Egbuka. So I don't know, Boone. I know I am personally rooting for him to turn it around. I just don't know that we can have any trust in him.
Yeah, we're not saying that he's cooked for a reason here. And I want to mention that all the guys that we're talking about on this episode, we want all of them to perform well, right? There's names that have come up week in and week out on the show. And we've said some fairly negative things about guys like Egbuka over the last few weeks. And yet I still, more than anything, would love to see him turn it around. And not just for my fantasy teams, for him as a person, for his career. We want to see this guy have a ton of success and get back on track. And it will happen. Just will it happen before the end of this season? I'm not so sure about that.
Not so sure about that. Never quite sure what to do with Jameson Williams, who is our next up and down wide receiver to talk about here. Jameson Williams, obviously coming off a nice game, predictable nice game against the Cowboys on Thursday night last week. He's definitely been better since Dan Campbell took over the play calling, but he's also got a 0 game in there since Dan Campbell took over the play calling. So it hasn't been perfect. He plays in LA, takes on a tough Rams defense, but not a perfect Rams defense, of course, as we know. That secondary can be got. So since Dan Campbell took over the play calling, we got 116 yards, 88 yards, 0 yards in week 12, 144 yards, and 96 yards. So mostly good since Dan Campbell's taken over. What's your level of trust on Jameson Williams going into week 15?
I don't see how it could be anything other than full trust here, right? I don't know. Like, is the worry the matchup? Like you said, the Rams are good defense, but they're sort of middle of the pack against fantasy receivers. So it's not like that's a matchup that's going to just completely wipe them off of your lineup. The game has just a bonkers 55.5 projected point total. So Vegas is expecting a ton of scoring, as I think we all should. So fireworks are scheduled for this one. And then you mentioned it, since the bye, touchdowns in 4 of 6 games. And he's been over 88 yards 4 times in his last 5 outings. Like, just because there's that 1-0 performance in there, if he had even 30 or 40 yards in that game, it wouldn't even necessarily catch your eye when you go over his results, right? So because there's that one, there's like the slightest amount maybe in some people, not for me. When you have a guy performing at this high of a level the vast majority of the time, we're good with it. And we don't have to get into the whole receiver conversation that all of them are going to have these down weeks where they might have 0 catches or 1 catch or something, and it's just going to happen. Certainly to a guy like this, who is not even like an elite receiver. So it's possible for that to occur. But when he's producing like this more often than not, just because, like, you know, the one down game happened recently, it was a few weeks ago, and it was against the Giants. It wasn't even a tough matchup, right? So we can't even look at that and say, oh, it's matchup based. It's nothing. It just happened. It was random. He had one bad game. The rest of the time, you have been very happy to have him in your lineup. And I think you're going to be really happy to have him in your lineup this week as well.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would just kind of note, because I keep saying when Dan Campbell took over the play calling, I think Dan Campbell's done a solid job as the play caller, which is a huge credit to Dan. Looking at like the route data, there's no difference in like, oh, now they've just had him stop running go routes. Like, no, he's been over 20% go route rate the last 3 weeks. He was not, there's only one like game where it was crazy high under John Morton, but there's a game, 27%, the game that he got 0 catches against the Giants, actually, funny enough, that he's like 27% go route, something like that. So the route tree's actually been pretty similar throughout the course of the season. Honestly, a lot of it is just, I think, randomness, the type of player he is. He's always going to be a little bit volatile, and Sam Laporta not being there is actually probably the biggest variable in why he's now getting a higher concentration of the targets. A lot of times we try to make this more complicated than it is, and I'm certainly, Mr. Complicated when it comes to wide receivers and passing games and stuff like that, but it's the same thing that's going on with Michael Wilson. Like, what's going on with Michael Wilson? Well, they had 3 guys that got the football in that offense, and then one of them got removed, so now the 2 other guys are getting the football a lot, and that is kind of what has happened here with Jameson Williams. So that is, again, just a testament to what's going on there in Detroit, Boone.
Yeah, and it all ties back into the Williams stuff, ties back into, like you said, that first conversation that we had when we were going over offenses that might not be quite as good or might have some struggles fantasy-wise. One of them was the Lions, and we mentioned that there were just too many mouths to feed in this offense. And yeah, all of a sudden you take away a guy, and next thing you know, Williams starts to step up, and it's been great. And I don't think people should be worried that it's going to change anytime soon. The tight end position is just not commanding a lot of targets in this offense without Laporta there.
All right, let's get to the next one here. And this was the player I was like, God, do I want to rank this guy or Emeka Egbuka higher? Which would have been a shocking statement to say back in like week 4. Brian Thomas Jr., okay? And look, I'm not trying to go crazy over 87 scoreless yards from this past week's game, but I talked about it with Chris on the recap show that I do think you're starting to see some positive signs from Brian Thomas Jr. One of my bold predictions on our show was that he was going to have a couple of, what did I say, like top 10 or wide receiver 1 weeks. 87 scoreless yards is not going to get you there, but this matchup against the Jets, Boone, pretty good. Am I stupid to say that I've got some trust? Like, I'm not saying I've got some trust. I'm saying I've got some trust in Brian Thomas Jr.
I think the question for me is, how much trust do I have in you now? Because you are the best wide receiver analyst in the game. And when you talk about receivers, I make sure that I listen and I factor that in. And I don't really want to trust him. But if I'm going to say some trust, it would be on the low end of some trust. Let's put it that way.
Like I said,
he's not
some
cooked.
trust.
Yeah. It was nice to see him have a game where, he put up a decent total, and you could spin this. I think I did this one time earlier in the season when we were talking about him, and you look at it, it's like, he's not one of these guys that just doesn't do anything in the box score, right? He has at least 49 yards or more in 7 of his last 9 games. So he is producing to some level. He's not having as many big games like we saw him have last year, but he is putting something up in the box score. He's not really giving you zeros. And yeah, you mentioned the matchup. The Jags should be able to control this one. They should be able to do what they want. So yeah, some trust, but a very small sum.
Very, very small sum, I think, is fair. Yeah, honestly, it's kind of similar, frankly, to the conversation we were just having with Emeka Egbuka, where it's like, hey, sometimes at the beginning of the season, Trevor is missing him inaccurate throws, and sometimes he's leaving plays on the field. I think he's starting to leave fewer plays on the field. And shoot, if you're looking at his catchable target rate according to Fantasy Points data is since week 6, that's just a random cutoff point because it was what I was looking at with Emeka there. It's at 83.9%. I'd love to get an 84% catchable freaking target rate to Emeka Egbuka at this point. So look, it's the matchup against the Jets. Like, I am tempted to call him a solid wide receiver 3 start against the New York Jets because they're so pathetic on defense. And I certainly think it's the type of defense too that plays a lot of man coverage, and Brian Thomas can still fry man coverage. So for the most part, it's a fact-finding mission the rest of the way for Brian Thomas in terms of, can he be a bounce-back guy in 2026? Can he be a good dynasty buy low in the offseason? I think there's going to be a couple moments, though, where he puts good games out, and I'm going to call my shot here and say that Week 15 is going to be one of those games. What could possibly go wrong?
Yeah, I'm sure all the people in their consolation brackets will love to have him in their lineup this week. That'll be great.
Okay, number one, how dare you? I have a salary cap draft where I spent an obnoxious amount of money on Nico Collins, Bijan Robinson, and Brian Thomas Jr. It was very studs and duds approach. And those are the 3 guys I spent an obnoxious amount of money on. You guys would probably not be surprised to find out the team started 0-3. We have clawed back. We have fought back, and we are 8-6 going into the fantasy playoffs. So, okay, I've got Brian Thomas Jr., and I need it to happen in this week. So I got to have some trust. That's the thing. I have to have the trust. So maybe this is all coming from my emotional needs in this one. One player I didn't draft a single time this offseason, and his kind of weird season has not really affected me in any way. That is DK Metcalf going against the Dolphins, coming off his best game of the season by a lot. Boone, do you have any trust after Aaron Rodgers turned back the clock and remembered that he had this big hulking receiver who, shout out to DK Metcalf, also was a punt gunner in this game too, got out there after Ben Skoranek got hurt. So shout out to DK for doing anything to help his team win.
I don't have a lot of trust, though, here. It's no trust for me. I mean, I missed on Metcalf last week, and so you mentioned how, having a guy on your team could impact you. How much does missing on a player in my rankings impact my feelings towards them? It probably does a little bit when we get on a show like this and talk about them. I had him down and it wasn't a huge miss. I had him down in the high-end wide receiver 3 range, and I think for good reason, because prior to that game, he was under 50 yards in 5 straight. No touchdowns in any of those 5 games. All of a sudden to just go off and 12 targets, 148 yards, 7 catches. I'm not exactly sure where that came from. He was barely startable before that. But we know he does have that in his bag. So it's always possible. It's just, the hit rate for him lately has been so far down that just because he had this one game, I don't know that you can have a lot of faith in him here. And I keep mentioning projected point totals because early in the week, that's one of the first things I'm going over and factoring into everything. 41 projected points in this game between the Dolphins and the Steelers on Monday night. So not exactly looking at this one like it's going to be a high scoring affair at all. He could still score a touchdown. He could still break a big play. That's always possible, but he wasn't really doing that a lot before this week. And I don't have a lot of faith that he's going to be able to do it more often than not the rest of the way. So another one of these guys where he could pop up for a good performance, but do you feel good about him in your lineup? Do you have faith? Do you have that trust? I don't, Harmon.
Yeah, we're showing the weather report. Might be low of 18 with a chance of snow showers in Pittsburgh for the Dolphins and Steelers on Monday Night Football. How is this game on Monday night? I mean, goodness gracious. I think wide receiver 3 could go well, could go bad. That's sort of the story with DK Metcalf. I think that ranking for him is perfect. The wide receiver 3 type where, yeah, if you need that hammer, maybe that's what he's going to give you on Monday night. Maybe he's going to give you another like 5 catch for 22 yards. We've seen that happen in this season as well. Final one to talk about. He's not a wide receiver, although people have for years been like, hey, why don't you chart Kyle Pitts? You chart wide receivers. Why aren't you charting Kyle Pitts? And you know what? You know how many people have asked me to chart Kyle Pitts this year, Boone? 0. The calls have finally stopped. And yet, over the last 3 weeks, Kyle Pitts leads all tight ends with the 29% share of his team's targets. Like, he's the number 1 tight end in target share the last 3 weeks. He has 197 yards, which is tied with Harold Fannin for second among tight ends behind only the great Trey McBride, who's got 28 targets and 219 receiving yards. What is our level of trust for Kyle Pitts, the tight end 1 savior? Is it finally happening? They play the Bucs on Thursday night in Tampa Bay.
It's some trust, but it's like the high end of some trust, and the sum is more based on it being Kyle Pitts, right? It's more based on the fact that
sure,
it's Kyle Pitts, and you just feel like at any moment the bottom's going to fall out, and you're going to feel foolish for trusting it. But yeah, you mentioned he has been really good lately. We don't know if Drake London is going to play this week. I'm pretty sure he didn't participate in practice today. He was listed as a non-participant, so it's a short turnaround. Is he going to be able to go in this game? I don't think so. If he wasn't able to play on the weekend, do we really think that 4 days later he's going to be able to get out there with the injury he has? It's possible. Not saying for sure, but I personally at the moment don't think that he's going to play this week. And even if he does, I mean, you look at the last 4 games that Pitts has had against Tampa, and you talk about like consistency with Kyle Pitts. It's not really something that, normally is mentioned with his name. And yet against Tampa here, 7 for 59 in week 1 this season, 4 for 91 and 2 against Tampa last year in Tampa, 7 for 88 at home versus the Bucs last year, 3 for 57 in 1 back in 2023. So not bad stats in his last 4 games against the Bucs. There's certainly something there. And if you add that to the fact that he's essentially working as their number 1 receiver, and I think that's why he makes sense in a segment like this, yeah, I do feel pretty good about him this week, giving you another top 10 fantasy performance, maybe even better, and continuing that until London returns.
Truly famous last words when we're talking about Kyle Pitts, but I also have some trust. I feel pretty good as well. Over the last 3 weeks, he averages 65.7 receiving yards per game. In the weeks 1 through 11 sample, it was 43.4. And there's 2 significant changes I could point to in terms of his deployment without Drake London. With Drake London in those first weeks 1 through 11, 3.8 yards after catch per reception, and he was in the slot on 26% of his snaps, out wide on 17.8%. If you look at these last 3 games, only out wide on 11% and in the slot on 32%, and he's averaging 6.5 yards after catch per reception. Like, without Drake London to do that middle of the field catch and run stuff that he dominates doing when he's in there, they have given some of that work to Kyle Pitts because they're not going to give it to Darnell Mooney. They're going to give it to David Sills or whoever the other receivers are on this roster. Pitts has basically finally gotten to do kind of what I think you want a mismatched tight end to do, and it's gone well for him. So will it continue to go well in fantasy football? Who knows? Some trust is the best way to go. Could go either. Could certainly. I think this will be okay. Yeah, that is, again, the designation for some trust is I think it will be okay, and I'm kind of feeling that way about Kyle Pitts. All right, we are going to take another quick break. When we come back, it's time for the backup running back rankings, the backup running backs that you need to stash heading into the fantasy postseason. We'll get into that right after this. All right, we're back. Now we're going to get into the backup running back rankings, which, Boone, you do for the site every week. You keep a log of the backup running backs, correct?
I do. I've done it all season long with the exception of the Thanksgiving week because things were a little tight that week. So something had to, fall out of the mix in that squeeze. But every other week I've done it. And it's not just, I think some people look at it and they see the top 10. And by the end of the top 10, they just close the page. After that, I have a bunch of other categories in there that show you how I'm valuing the rest of the guys, all the way down to like those deep potential dynasty stashes that might be on your dynasty waiver wire. So people should take a look at that, scroll down, and you can see how I'm valuing basically every backup running back in the league who's worth anything. You can see their names in there.
Okay, so here's how this is going to go. Number one, I say it every week, but we're reading again in 2025. We've got less than a month left, but you are going to go ahead to the website and read Boone's piece, even after we do this segment, because there's going to be much more than we can get into here in this particular podcast. But let's go through first your top 10, and once you get, let's have you. We're going to have you give out the top 10, and then I kind of want to pick it apart and try to group some of these players in terms of like guys, just in sort of my designations of like, oh, okay, what I'm viewing. I'm not going to disagree with your list, like orders or whatever, but just some descriptors here. But anyways, let's let it rip here. Who are the top 10 backup running backs in the NFL right now?
So I have kind of a tier break in this, and it's right in the middle. It's sort of broken up into 5 and 5, exactly like it is there. And in those tiers, I would listen to any argument you want to give. If you want to shuffle up and deal the guys that are in those tiers, it's fine. It's very close. We're kind of splitting hairs between them. But I think it is a distinct 5 and 5 here. So as people can see who are watching, Kyle Monangai with the Bears is number 1 right now. David Montgomery with the Lions, number 2. Zach Charbonnet, number 3. Blake Corum, who's coming off a huge game, at number 4. And Chuba Hubbard, who has kind of had this resurgence as he's gotten healthier. He is number 5. I think those guys, if an injury happens, they get into the lineup and they get into the starting spot and they just absolutely blow up. And yet at the same time, they're giving you like pretty good flex value, RB3 type value most weeks. So those guys, really, really like them. Those are the top 5. And then after that, we're looking at Brian Robinson Jr., Ramondre Stevenson, and we can argue whether he's the starter or the backup. I don't really care too much about that. Maybe you're going to bring that up here. That doesn't really matter to me. I know who should be the starter, and that's how I'm ranking it. Bashal Tutin with the Jags is number 8. Tyler Algier, number 9. And then Kenneth Gainwell, who, when he's gotten opportunities this year, has kind of made a case that he should be in that top 5 because the ceiling with him is just so high. And yet not normally doing the most with his chances. I know he scored a touchdown this week, but gives you a little bit of flex value. I just don't think he's quite on the same level as those running backs that I mentioned in the top 5 there. But those are 2 very distinct groups of 5 there for me, Harmon.
Yeah, I think this is the challenge when you're doing this exercise, specifically on the 6 to 10 column here, in that I think, let's hypothetically say Travion Henderson missed a game and Bijan Robinson missed a game. I would much rather have Tyler Algier than Ramondre Stevenson, just based on what we've seen so far. But like, Stevenson's going to give you a couple of, if you're absolutely completely hosed and you need to start Stevenson, I don't know, mate. Are you feeling better about Stevenson over Tyler Algier? It's not like been that great for Ramondre Stevenson. So again, that's just the challenge with an exercise like this. And that's kind of why I wanted to sort of give these some designations here. Like, I think 1 to 5 here is, you're right, is its own tier. Monangai, Montgomery, Charbonnet, Corum, Chuba Hubbard. Like, these guys are flex with benefits, right? Where they have standalone value, and if anything happened to the starter ahead of them, we'd be ranking them as what, like running back 1 types? I think maybe, and I actually think like Corum and Hubbard, I might rank ahead of Charbonnet if there was an injury to Kenneth Walker and then versus an injury to their other 2 guys. But regardless, like, those players are the ones that they're generally pretty highly rostered. They should be 100% roster. I think for whatever reason, Corum is the guy who still needs to be added more than the rest of them. I believe he's going to come up in the waiver wire segment, so we won't get too deep into him here. But yeah, 1 to 5 Boone to me seems pretty clearly like they're going to give you some points if you got to play him, and you're hoping like Dave Montgomery pops into the end zone as he did last week. But regardless, if anything happened to the starter, they'd be instant fantasy running back 1s.
Yeah, and we could talk through them a little bit. Like Monangai, and again, we're splitting hairs with all these guys, but let's just mention their situations a little bit here. Monangai's really turned this into like a 60-40, basically 55-45 type split in this backfield. Scored a touchdown in 4 straight weeks before week 14. Still had 57 yards this week, which, was usable. But we also saw, and yes, it was a great matchup against the Bengals, but we saw the kind of ceiling that he could offer in the lead back role. And it's not going to be 198 scrimmage yards on 29 touches every time he gets the lead back role. But still, you want to see him crush when he's in a good matchup and has that starting job. And he did, right? So that tells me that if he's ever the starter in this offense, if his number's ever called in a given week, he can produce. And, he's an RB3 right now, but definitely has that top 12 upside. David Montgomery is, kind of like the Ramondre Stevenson one. At least he used to be. And at the start of this season, he was, where everybody would say he's not a backup. He's basically, it's a 1A, 1B situation. But this year, it hasn't exactly been like that, right? We've seen him kind of take more of a backseat in this offense. He's now seen 10 touches or less in 4 consecutive outings. It just makes him like a touchdown or bust RB3. And yet, touchdowns each of the last 2 weeks. Like, he's shown he can still do it. And for sure, he is an RB1 if something happened to Jahmyr Gibbs. For Charbonnet, again, another situation where it was close early in the season. He at times was even playing over Walker. And now that's sort of settled back down since the bye. We've seen Walker establish himself as the lead back. 6 straight games now where Walker's played more. But even in that complementary role, Charbonnet has these games where he finds the end zone, where he'll have a decent yardage total, and you can use him. Corum is very interesting because we talked about him last week on one of the shows. I think someone wrote in about him when we were doing the 6-pack on Thursday. And we mentioned that it didn't really hurt Kyron that much because Kyron, even though he was losing some touches, is incredibly fresh, producing great, right? He looks fantastic. And yet Corum is just adding to his value. And that's what we saw this week, right? We see this offense is so good. They're dominating. And now Corum's showing the last 2 weeks, 81 yards and a touchdown, and then 131 yards and 2 scores. It's just a testament to how good this Rams offense is. And he's getting better as a running back. I think he has definitely improved this year. And Chuba, we mentioned, right? The volume is going up for him. He's getting a little healthier. And right now, if you just look at their last game, he looks like the back with more juice. Does he not? Like, he looks like the faster guy. And whether Rico Dowdle's getting beaten down, whether he's got some injuries that he's dealing with, and Chuba's just healthier at the moment, I don't think it's impossible that we see Chuba take this backfield over down the stretch.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see what that split looks like coming out of the bye for Carolina, with both guys hopefully closer to 100%, because Chuba finally looks closer to the old version of himself, farther away from that calf injury. But Rico Dowdle's been kind of dealing with nicks and bruises here throughout the course of his time handling a ton of volume. So we'll see what that split looks like. We have a lot of time this week to sort of break that down. But yeah, those guys should be easily 100% rostered. I think also your group of 6 through 10, they should all also be 100% rostered at this point. Brian Robinson, Ramondre Stevenson, Basil Tootin, Tyler Algier, Kenneth Gainwell. I think Robinson and Algier are the 2 guys that stand out the best to me, that if their starter was removed, I think they would also jump up to instant running back 1 type conversations, good running back, good rushing ecosystems. They both look like good players too. We've had moments of them carrying the football a lot in previous stops. Tootin, I'd love to think is that guy. He just hasn't quite caught on. He's dealing with some injuries. And then Kenneth Gainwell and Ramondre Stevenson are more like committee backs, but if they did consolidate the work, that would look good for those guys. So I think that's kind of a good breakdown of 6 through 10. But I do want to hear about your honorable mentions here. You've got a ton of guys in the honorable mention category. You don't have to name them all, but maybe give the people some players in your honorable mention category that you do feel pretty strongly like if something happened to the starter, you want this guy on your bench, not on waiver wires.
Yeah, we're looking at guys who have done it before when they've gotten opportunities. We saw Emmanuel Wilson on the Packers come through when Josh Jacobs missed a game there. He can definitely get it done. He's in a good offense. Jordan Mason, we might not have as much confidence in that offense, but he ends up stepping up as the lead back, which we also saw him do earlier in the season. Maybe didn't hit the ceiling that we had hoped for him. Doesn't have a huge role in the passing game, but he can still get it done. We saw him find the end zone this week. Devin Singletary is somebody that I think people should certainly be going out and picking up. It looks like Tyron Tracy Jr. avoided a serious injury in that last game before the bye. That's at least according to him. We'll see what it looks like when they get back out there this week for practice and whether he's on the field and whether he's feeling as good as he made it sound like he feels. But also it's a situation where there's not really anybody else, right? If we now lose Tracy after losing Cam Scadaboo, this would be Devin Singletary's backfield, and we've seen him produce. The last few weeks here, he's put up some good numbers, and when he took over more work in that game when Tracy got banged up, he performed really, really well. I believe he had 100 yards from scrimmage. Tajay Spears, it hasn't happened for him this year, but if Tony Pollard went down, we've seen in years past, especially the fantasy playoffs last season, Tajay Spears was one of those heroes that helped people down the stretch. So he's a guy to look at. Ray Davis, Tank Bigsby, they're kind of in the same boat where they're not going to give you much value. You can't really put them in your lineup as a flex, but if the starter goes down on their team, I'm confident that they would step into the more valuable role potentially, even though Ty Johnson for the Bills and
100%.
Even though Will Shipley for the Eagles would be involved. I think these two would be the guys that would perform it. We saw Bigsby looked pretty good when he got more of an opportunity earlier in the season. Ray Davis, you got to go back to last year to look at a couple games where he got more volume, but he performed very well and produced. So those would be the guys that stand out for me there.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, these are players, Ray Davis, Tank Bigsby, are perfect examples of guys that, like, just check your waiver wire, see if they're out there. They're widely available. And if you're at the point where you don't need that fifth wide receiver, you don't need a backup quarterback, you don't need stuff like that, stick those guys on the end of your bench, just see what happens. Because if, James Cook, God forbid, like, knock on wood, anything happens to him, Ray Davis would be a guy everybody's trying to pick up, and nothing feels better than having your opponent go out to the waiver wire and be like, I'm going to pick up Ray Davis from my lineup this week. And, oh, shoot, he's on insert your name here's bench. That would be great. I would also note, too, just real quick, Jalen Wright and Ollie Gordon both have – I know it was the Jets, but they're obviously guys that are, Achan's dealing with an injury. I don't think we're talking about them in the waiver wire segment, but look, Achan probably is fine, but just in case – maybe take a look and see if those guys can be added to your bench. It looks like Jalen Wright is a little bit ahead of Ollie Gordon at this point.
Yeah, we are talking about them in the waiver wire section as a deep, deep sleeper, not a deep sleeper anymore. They were going to be mentioned at the very end. We'll still bring them up, but
what an idiot.
Yeah,
okay.
and it's also,
I didn't scroll to the bottom.
It was one that I was questioning even putting in there because it sounds like Devon Achane is going to be okay. Apparently, Mike McDaniel said that Achane was adamant that he could have gone back into the game, but they really didn't need him to because the Jets quarterback situation and the Dolphins were just dominating that one. So again, we'll follow the practice participation. McDaniel said he might get some rest this week to try to heal him up, but it doesn't really sound like he's going to miss time. And yet, what if he comes out next week and aggravates that injury or something? So this is the other reason, right? We're past the bye weeks. There's really no reason to have like those mid-level receivers, or you might not really need a backup tight end or a quarterback. I don't carry those. I want to fill my bench with these types of players that, like Harmon mentioned, can just blow up if an injury happens. And some of these guys might not even be like completely obvious. Like Malik Davis was not someone that we thought would be, a number 2 back before the season and a guy that you might want to roster. And yet right now he looks like the Cowboys backup that you would want to have if Javonte Williams went down. So that's why it's always good to scroll down in that column that I do every week and check out some of those names that are a little bit deeper. And I'll even mention the injuries in there, right? So for example, here, Keaton Mitchell is going to be a guy who might be in like my little injury section of backups who are hurt at the moment, but he's someone that we mentioned that Bengals opponent, right? Going again against the Bengals this week, he could have a fantastic game. Running backs, even backup running backs, tend to put up decent numbers against them for fantasy. So if he's healthy, he's somebody that you could look at as a flex this week, even though I don't think he's on a ton of people's radars.
Yeah, you said it. This is exactly why I wanted to do this segment, because this is the time of the year when people need to cut loose on that wide receiver depth. And look, a hand up, I love rostering my favorite little pet wide receivers, and getting them the fantasy title. But from a strategic perspective, you need to be putting these backup running backs on your bench. We're going to take our final break here. I'm going to beat myself up during the break for not scrolling down to the deep stash section and blowing what could have been a perfect transition to the waiver wire segment. So while I'm beating myself up, we're going to take a break, and then we're going to come back and we're going to talk Justin Boone's waiver wire selections. We'll get into that right after this. All right, we're back. It's time to go through the waiver wire. We go position by position here. Let's start quarterbacks. Justin Boone, let's get into it. Who are the 4 quarterbacks that people should be adding this week?
I really feel like at some point we should have bumped quarterbacks to the end of this segment because it's always such a boring way to start. It has been rough. Like the last few weeks looking for a quarterback on the waiver wire, there has not been much to choose from. And that's why I'm including a couple guys here that are over the 50% rostered mark, which in my column, I mentioned them just as like one-liners. If they're kind of between 50 and 60% rostered, but it makes sense to just throw them in so that people know and they can look for them just in case they're available. I mean, it's not even great with these guys. Trevor Lawrence going against the Jets in a game that, like we said earlier, we think the Jaguars are going to be able to control that game. He can probably do pretty well in that one, and he's played better recently, multiple touchdowns in 3 straight. I think they're going to roll in that one, so you just kind of chase the points there. Sam Darnold versus the Colts, another game where we think that they're probably going to have no problem beating that banged-up Colts squad. He's coming off a 3-touchdown game last week, and that team's probably just going to be really dejected too, right? So the Seahawks are going to have a fantastic outing in that one. Let's just hope that we don't have multiple defensive and special teams touchdowns that prevents the offense from putting up all the points. And then it gets fun, right? Then it gets to the guys who are actually available in a bunch of leagues.
Fun.
JJ McCarthy against the Cowboys. And this tells you how bad it is on the waiver wire, Harmon, that we have to look at JJ McCarthy potentially starting for some people in the fantasy playoffs. I don't even want to recommend this, but I promise you, if you go look at the other options, there is nothing else out there. There are not other guys that offer you the kind of ceiling, 3-touchdown kind of games. There's not many of them out there. Do you really want to be starting Aaron Rodgers and guys? You don't, right? So we're looking at McCarthy. We're, hanging our hat on the fact that the schedule is very easy. He's getting this matchup against the Cowboys this week. It's a fantastic matchup, as we mentioned earlier. He's going to be able to put up points against them, I think, as long as they stick to this quick, get the ball out of his hands, keep the offense moving. And yet still, I don't feel good about it, Harmon. I'm not excited to put him in any lineup. And then Bryce Young, who was coming off bye, has a pair of 3-touchdown games in his last 3 outings. He went against the Saints in week 10. I shouldn't even be making the argument against myself, but I am. Went against the Saints in week 10. It was not that long ago. Had one of his worst outings of the season. 124 passing yards, no touchdowns, 1 interception, 1 fumble. And yet you just kind of got to hope that maybe the light turned on for him in the last few weeks and that they're going to be really prepared coming off the bye and be able to put up some points in that game. But yeah, if you are a Daniel Jones manager and you're looking for somebody on the waiver wire this week, I wish you good luck because there are not a lot of good options out there.
I mean, Trevor Lawrence has been the number 1 waiver wire quarterback for so long. He could be the 3rd co-host of this podcast. He's been right there for such a long time. Oh my God. What are the producers are literally baiting me with these stats. Okay. So since the merger, only 2 quarterbacks have thrown for exactly 364 passing yards in their 3rd career start. Tom Brady and Shedeur Sanders. Oh, here's another Shedeur Sanders one. Games with 300 plus passing yards this season. Shedeur Sanders 1, Drake May, Caleb Williams, Trevor Lawrence, Cam Ward 0. Just the bait is there, and I've taken the bait. You want to add Shedeur Sanders at this point? I don't know about that.
No, there is no reason to go out and get Shedeur Sanders. He's had a really easy schedule that he's done this against, and the games haven't been that great, but I'm really happy for him. I'm looking at this from a fantasy perspective, right? And from a fantasy perspective, I don't think you want to chase, what he did last week. And I think he's benefited from going against some easier defenses, like the Titans in that last game. I don't know that he is going to be a real fantasy asset down the stretch, but it's awesome to see. And it makes Stefanski look pretty bad that they didn't see this in him earlier. But that also doesn't surprise me at all because it's dictated by draft capital, and Dylan Gabriel they took earlier and they had to prove to themselves he's not the guy. He's not. At least maybe Shedeur can become the longtime backup there.
Yeah, and I mean, he can make things interesting. Apparently, they're going to bring Deshaun Watson back for whatever reason next year. So, Shador and Deshaun Watson, Browns QB room 2026. Have fun with that. No, I think he is interesting, at least in like Superflex leagues in this matchup against the Bears. And he's going to be able to get the football to a guy that we're talking about in a later section. So, we'll come back to that point there. But just one point underscoring Sam Darnold. Charvarius Ward is in the concussion protocol for the third time this year. And obviously, Sauce Gardner likely out for a few more weeks. So, certainly a good matchup for Sam Darnold. He would be of the guys who are, available and not 50%, but close to it. He's certainly someone that is top of my list there. Let's get to the running back position. Who are we adding off the waiver wire at running back?
I mean, a lot of familiar names that we've talked about in recent weeks. We're looking at Chris Rodriguez Jr. going up against the Giants, Bam Knight at the Texans. I'll explain why. It's not for that matchup that we're necessarily picking up Bam Knight, but there's a reason why you want to pick him up if he's out there. Blake Corum, who we just talked about, looks fantastic as the backup there and is putting up RB3, if not RB2 numbers as the complementary option in that backfield. And then Devin Singletary, who we also mentioned in a good matchup with the Commanders, and he's able to produce even if he is playing in that secondary role behind Tyron Tracy Jr., but there is still a chance that Tyron Tracy Jr. might not be 100% coming off the bye. So we're going to keep an eye on that. But Rodriguez, I mean, he's coming off a quieter game. It was a tougher matchup with the Vikings, just 10 carries for 52 yards. But he is the lead back in this offense. And this was the matchup that weeks ago when I brought him up, this was the matchup we were looking at. Go up against the Giants. It's a great opponent. He will be able to produce if he continues to be that lead back, which I expect him to. We're not really seeing any signs that Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt is coming to take this job back. So it's going to be Rodriguez, and he's been good, right? He posted 65 yards and a score against the Seahawks, a touchdown against the Lions, 85 yards on 16 touches in the loss to the Dolphins, 41 yards and a touchdown against the Broncos. So those are usable fantasy stats. He's not coming in to win you your league, but he can get into your lineup this week as an upside RB3. Bam Knight. So we got to have the Trey Benson conversation, right? I don't know about you, Harmon. It doesn't seem like he's coming back, right? He came back for one limited practice. Since then, 5 straight DNPs. When Gannon was asked about it, he basically couldn't confirm or deny. He's like, I don't know if he's going to come back this year. I'm paraphrasing, but that's essentially what he said, right? And that tells me that they don't have a lot of confidence that he's going to get activated. And if he's not activated this week, then that's it for the season. Then he remains on IR. So I think we're looking at Bam Knight being the lead back the rest of the way. I'm hoping that Benson comes back to practice this week and can prove me wrong. But if it's Knight, like I said, this Texans matchup, it's very scary. You don't want to do anything against this Texans defense. You don't want to start players. It's after that we're looking at. Falcons in week 16, they give up the 10th most fantasy points to running backs. Bengals in week 17, the best matchup for fantasy backs. So Bam Knight is going to have something to say if he's the starter for this offense the rest of the way. Corum, we don't need to rehash it. He looks fantastic, and he can produce for you as an RB3 flex, maybe more. And yeah, Singletary going up against the Commanders, great matchup there, regardless of whether he's starting, if Tracy's hurt, or whether he's the backup, which it looks like he is going to be back in that backup role. But he's produced, man, like at least 45 scrimmage yards in 5 straight contests while playing out there with Tyron Tracy. And when he did get more snaps, like I mentioned earlier, 102 yards and a score in that last game. So Singletary still getting it done. A motor, right? Motor Singletary, the nickname. He can still produce, and he's somebody that you could go out and pick up and potentially play this week if you're in a pinch.
Yeah, definitely some familiar names there and players we've talked a lot about. And I certainly need Bam Knight I need to make it to week 17 so that Bam Knight can play the Cincinnati Bengals. My God, what is Trey McBride going to do to the Bengals? You just know because fantasy football is fantasy football. He's going to have like 5 catches for 38 yards in that game. You just know it deep down in your bones. That is totally what's happening. Okay, let's get to wide receivers here because we've got 4 really interesting names. I wouldn't say we have any like true, oh my God, smash, this guy's going to win you your leagues, but 4 interesting names to talk about here, Boone.
Yeah, Luther Burden versus the Browns, Jaden Reed at the Broncos, Jalen Coker, who we brought up many times against the Saints, and then Ryan Flournoy versus the Vikings. And for Burden, this all comes down to Rome Odunze, right? And he missed week 14. It's a stress fracture in his foot. It doesn't seem like that's an injury that he's coming back soon from him. I think this is more week to week than day to day. I think he's going to miss at least another game with this one. And in this game, I know it wasn't like the most exciting for fantasy. It was 6 targets, 4 catches, 67 yards. Burden also had 3 yards on the ground in that game, but he led the team in all those categories, right? Well, not the rushing production, obviously, but in the receiving stuff, targets, catches, yards. He was leading the team in those categories. So that's great to see. You want to see when a rookie gets out there, he's producing. And this guy mentioned on our Sunday morning show, but I just love the way he carries himself. He's already carried himself like he's a superstar receiver. I think it's only a matter of time until he gets there. So I'm excited about him. But again, for fantasy at the moment, it's just like, wide receiver 4 flex. And if we get confirmation that Odunze's out, maybe we bump him up into that wide receiver 3 range. Jayden Reed, we've talked about him many times. We wanted to see what he was going to do when he came back here. Played 47% of the snaps, which I think is a little low. We know he's not a full-time player in this offense normally, but 47%, a little lower than what he normally plays when he is healthy. 31 yards, though, on 4 catches, 22 yards on 2 carries. You'd like to see him doing that, getting over 50 yards in his first game back. A pretty, formidable secondary looms in week 15. So this is a matchup with the Broncos that you might not want to start him in. But go pick him up, put him on your bench, see what he can do in this contest, and then you go from there, you reassess, and maybe he gets back into your lineup. And I've mentioned before, there have been stretches of his career where he has produced like a top 12, top 15 fantasy receiver. I don't necessarily think that's going to happen here, but that's just to tell you the kind of ceiling that he could potentially provide if everything goes right for him. Coker coming off a bye. I believe we talked about him before the bye. Prior to 50 yards in 2 of his last 3 games, including that season high 4 for 74 and 1 in week 13. And I've mentioned this stat before, I think it was earlier in the season, but if we remove that first game of the 2024 season, we only played less than 10% of the snaps in that one. If you take that one out of the mix and you make, the rest of his numbers on pace over a full 17 game season, he was on pace for 800 yards. And that was as a rookie. So I know I'm kind of tinkering with the stats a little bit there, but still, this guy could produce. We've talked about him being potentially the best fit to be the number 2 in that offense. He's coming off his best game. Let's see if after the bye, he can build on that. And then Ryan Flournoy, it's just coming down to the CeeDee Lamb thing. If Lamb is healthy, if he clears concussion protocol, then you don't really even need to roster him. But if Lamb doesn't play in this game, we saw a ceiling performance from him, 115 yards and a touchdown last time out. So you look at him as a potential guy that could get in your lineup, but it's all about whether Lamb is going to be able to clear concussion protocol or not.
Like I said earlier, I thought he looked good in that game. I thought he's run some good routes. So I'm open to, I'm floor curious again. That's where I'm at with Ryan Flournoy right now. Yeah, Luther Burden didn't play more snaps with Rome Odunze out. That's the only thing that's tough. He was obviously the most productive guy. I think he's the second best receiver on that team outside of Rome Odunze with where DJ Moore is at this point. But they basically just stuck Olamide Zaccheaus in Rome Odunze's vacated kind of move around role, which is a bit of a bummer for Luther Burden. Can't really count on him. I'll note on Jayden Reed that the Broncos, I think Christian Watson probably draws past Surtain, which that's a matchup we'll talk about later in the week when it comes down to start-sit decisions. But the Broncos have allowed the 5th most air yards and the 8th most targets to receivers lined up in the slot this year. And typically it is kind of that number 2 receiver that draws a lot of the targets in that game. In games against the Broncos, Riley Moss, the second outside corner, he'll get got every now and again. So, and Reed, I thought looked good, and he did draw some defensive attention. So, again, you can't, if we're putting him on the trust meter, we can't say full trust for Jayden Reed based on the playing time and everything like that. But I think there are more positive indicators for him, if you need to play him. And, I'm always going to be excited about Jalen Coker, so no need to add any words on that one. Let's get to the tight ends here. Yet another group of familiar faces here in the tight end section. I would say if we're going to start a 4-man pod here based on how often their faces have appeared in the YouTube algorithm for the Yahoo Fantasy Forecast, it's going to be me, it's going to be you, it's going to be Trevor Lawrence, it's going to be Harold Fannin. So look out for our debut show in 2026.
Yeah, so Fannin and Colston Loveland, we mentioned basically every week. I don't know how they aren't over that 50% rostered mark. They're both at 40%.
Especially
rostered. Fannin. Yeah, they're both producing low-end tight end 1s to high-end tight end 2s. I would think that they'd want to be rostered in every fantasy league, and yet that's not the case. We also have Isaiah Likely here going up against the Bengals again. We mentioned him earlier. He had a good game against them a couple weeks ago. In the last 2 weeks, he's really come on. So you figure if every other tight end in the world can put up points on the Bengals, why can't Likely do it again here? And then Darren Waller didn't have a great game last week. I definitely whiffed on my bold prediction for him. And yet we saw what he did before his injury earlier in the season, the touchdowns. He can get there any given week, right? He can find the end zone. He could put up a decent day. So we're looking at him as well here. And Fannin, normally we just like skim over him in this section. We don't even really talk about him. We just go, yeah, Harold Fannin's here again, moving on kind of thing. But it is probably worth mentioning, right? He's the tight end 11 in fantasy points per game on the year. Over the last 3 weeks, David Njoku, he's been playing through a little bit of an injury. And yes, Shedeur Sanders has gotten out there under center and he's targeting Fannin a whole bunch. But we've seen Fannin's playing time increase over this last little stretch. And over these 3 weeks, he's moved up to the tight end 4 in fantasy points per game during that span. And then Njoku hurt his knee on Sunday. I don't know if that's going to cost him time moving forward, but we really could see Fannin out there as a full-time player in this offense, as essentially like the de facto number 1 pass catcher in the offense. It's exactly what you want, right? And he's coming off an 8-catch, 114-yard, 1-touchdown game. Why would you not chase that? Why would he not be rostered everywhere? Colston Loveland, not really putting up the exact same stats like Fannin is, not getting the same kind of volume, but talent-wise, he definitely passes the eye test, and he is still producing, right? Since week 9, he's the tight end 6 in fantasy points per game. I think he looks like a potential superstar. You hope that the volume eventually gets there to allow him to be that kind of thing for fantasy, but he's in, like I said, that low-end tight end 1, high-end tight end 2 range. And the likely conversation we already had, that he had 5 catches for 95 yards against them 2 weeks ago. And he's had these opportunities where he hasn't been able to catch these touchdowns, or he's fumbled right at the goal line, or he caught the touchdown and the refs ruled it not a catch for some reason. He could have had much bigger games these last 2 weeks, and yet he still came through for fantasy in both contests. So going up against the Bengals, you want to start your tight ends there. I think he is a great play again this week.
Yeah, just to underscore the Harold Fannin point, there are 12 tight ends that have averaged, obviously a few of the guys I'm going to say here are rookies. They're not finished, but like averaged over 8 PPR, half PPR points per game as rookie tight ends. These are the following players: Brock Bowers, Sam Laporta. Weirdly enough, because I'm queuing this up on True Media, and this is since 2005, by the way. Tim Tebow and Jordan Matthews show up there. So I'm just saying that. Let me start the list over here because obviously they didn't play tight end in their rookie seasons. This is where they're listed last. They played in the NFL. Brock Bowers, Sam Laporta, Jordan Reed, Tyler Warren, Evan Ingram, Harold Fannin, Aaron Hernandez, Kyle Pitts, Rob Gronkowski, Oronde Gadsden. So like that's the type of year that Harold Fannin is having. He is definitely somebody I want to be starting here during the fantasy football playoffs. So shout out to Shedeur Sanders. He's playing so well that I really want to start Harold Fannin, who needs to be way more than 40% rostered. That is an absolute crime. All right, Boone, I spoiled it earlier, but tell the people about your 2-for-1 special deep stash candidates heading into week 15.
Yeah, Jalen Wright and Ollie Gordon. For most of the season, Ollie Gordon was playing like the number 2 back, but in this game, they kind of went with like a hot hand approach. Now, it's one game. They were dominating this game, so they could do whatever they wanted, right? And apparently, Achane could have come back for this one, so we don't think the injury is too serious. We're going to monitor this week to see his practice participation. But in this game, Wright was the hotter hand. And, you know, he had a ton of stats, even though Achane had 105 scrimmage yards and a touchdown. So he still got there for fantasy. But we saw Ollie Gordon find the end zone, but we saw Jalen Wright go crazy, 107 yards and a touchdown. If you had to pick between them, he's the guy that I would stash here. Really, we're not looking necessarily like he's going to get a start this week. It's more just if that Achane injury gets aggravated, if he eventually misses time in the next couple weeks here. We know the Dolphins running game definitely can produce for fantasy, so you want to look to pick up these guys in deeper formats.
All right, that's going to do it. Boone, hell of a show here, buddy. This was jam-packed. Trust meter, backup running backs, waiver wire. Appreciate it as always. Good to talk with you, man. And we'll do this again on Thursday. We got a ton of matchups to get into then, so always good to chat with you, buddy.
And it's even more important now. The pressure is heightened every week going forward.
I feel the pressure in my personal life, that is for sure, when it comes to my fantasy football decisions. So the pressure is absolutely ratcheted up. We're going to be back here. This show will return tomorrow with Ray Garvin. Joins me for another edition of the Data Dump as we get you ready for Week 15. That's going to be live right here, 5 p.m. Eastern on this YouTube channel. So like, subscribe, do all the things. Until then, we are out.